Stillness is the natural state of our mind, believe it or not. When we allow it to, the mind always returns back to stillness. When we allow it to. But there's certain things that we do in our lives, and there's certain things in the way that we live our life that actually takes it away from that. But what you'll find, just doing that little practice just then, yeah? Just putting everything down for a short while, did you notice how the mind started to quieten down? You notice that? Yeah? And do you notice you might even get to a certain point and then it just feels like it just won't go any lower? When I asked you to relax into that, was anyone able to do that? What happened then?
You sort of went down again.
You went down again?
Yeah,
ah.
It sort of gone up and then it went down again.
Yeah.
Doing that.
So notice it's our own resistance to that actually stops it from happening. We come to a meditation class and we say, hey, I want to experience stillness and peace and quiet. But when you watch it, our attention keeps turning outward, doesn't it? Keeps turning towards things. So when we're meditating, what we're doing is we're balancing our effort or energy in what we're doing. If we put too much effort in, if you picture a scale, one of the old scales with the disc, put too much effort in, it actually puts the scale out of balance. And what you'll do is you'll get a mental restlessness. So your attention will want to jump around a lot. You'll go to thoughts, go to sounds, won't feel comfortable in your body. That sounds familiar? If you put too much effort. And if you put too much effort, you'll find those blockages, that tension building up inside. And that's why I said relaxing to that, because then what you're doing is you're relaxing into that effort. You're actually lowering your effort. The other side of the scale is too little effort. So what do you think happens if you put in too little effort in meditation?
You go to sleep.
Yeah? And what's even worse than going to sleep?
Dullness.
Dullness. Dullness is worse than going to sleep. You'll end up sinking into a very dull, half awake, half asleep state, dreamlike state, just floating around. It can be quite blissful, it can be quite peaceful, it can be really enticing and feel like a rest from the world. And it's a dangerous part of the practice. A lot of people, when they meditate, actually meditate into this state. The problem with it is it's a state of not knowing. There's no clarity. So basically that state comes about when your awareness becomes very, very low. Yeah? The mindfulness is very, very low, and the concentration is high, but it's not balanced with the mindfulness, with the investigation. And so you can spend 20, 30, 40, 50 years going into this. And you go, well, it's a good thing because I feel relaxed and peaceful. Yeah? Yeah, well, if that's what we want, that's fantastic. You can have that. The thing about this state is when you come out of it, anything that's still happening in your life, all your habitual tendencies will still be there, waiting for you. They're just being suppressed. They're just suppressed because there's no knowledge, there's no wisdom, there's no understanding being developed. What we need is a higher level of mindfulness So with our effort, we have to put our effort in a skillful way. So the effort that we put in isn't the effort to concentrate. If we do that, then it'll be too much effort. The effort we put in is to remember, this is what I'm experiencing right now, and this is how I'm relating to what I'm experiencing right now. That's what the effort is, into that remembering, and that's mindfulness. That's what mindfulness is. And if you notice when you're meditating, the hardest part is that remembering, isn't it? Knowing where your attention is sitting. So why would remembering where your attention is, where it's sitting, have anything to do with stillness and peace? What's that got to do with anything?
Because what your attention is on, like if you remember it, that's often where something's wanting to express, to not resist it, and then you relax.
There can be resistance, and that can cause problems.
Feel into it and then you relax more?
Yeah, we do. We do that so that we can actually apply the meditation technique. It's okay. Don't worry, I often feel like I don't either.
You're not thinking in the future or the past?
Yes, that's part of it. We need to get that, but what we do is we draw our attention into the present so we can see what's really happening. What's really going on, how we're really relating to things, right? But the reason why we want to be really, really present with the object and know where our attention sits, right, is so that we can actually understand its true nature. Understand its true nature. So what we do when we meditate, we tend to focus on the objects that are coming up in our meditation practice rather than the space in which they're coming up. So the mind itself is still, but the thoughts, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the sensations, likes, dislikes, judgments are happening within that space, within that stillness. And so what you'll find is when you're meditating, turning your attention away from these sounds, these thoughts, these sensations in a way that you're no longer focusing on them, and then the mind starts to settle down and go back to its own balance, and then you start to notice more space around things. You'll notice space around things. Does that make sense so far? As usual, it will get clearer. As usual, it will get clearer as I go on. I always go condense and unpack. That's how the Buddha used to teach. The Buddha used to be very condensed, and then you'd unpack it. And I love that way of teaching, so that's the way I teach. Okay. So let's start off with an example. Can you see my hand? Yeah? You see my hand. Yeah. So it's quite clear to you. Can you see the space around my hand? How do you see the space around my hand? How do you do it? How do you transition from seeing my hand to seeing the space around it?
Focus or concentrate on.
Yeah, but we're not on the hand. You look at the edge of the hand. You look at the edge of the hand. You don't look at the centre of the hand, you look at the edge of the hand. Is this correct?
Yes.
Now notice my hands here. When you look at my hand, all you see is my hand. But notice there's a lot more space in this room than my hand is taking up. So my hand is moving within this space. You notice no matter how I move my hand, the space is still exactly the same. The space is still. So what we tend to do when we're in this room, we tend to see the events in this room, which is us, and the furniture, and the movement, and the action, but we don't actually see the space in the room. You can train yourself to see the space and see the objects moving through it or acting in it, rather than looking at the individual things. If you just look at the space around me rather than at me, notice the space is still. Notice when you look at it, your mind goes still. You see? That stillness is everywhere. So I'm going external and then I'll go internal. But that is everywhere, that space is everywhere. So if we look outside, if we look at the sky, what we call the sky, that is a vast stillness. Some days you can actually see how still it is on a nice spring day. You can see how still it is, no clouds, beautiful sun, yeah? Other days it can have big storms going through it. Winds, hail, big storms and rain. Regardless of what storms, what weather patterns are happening, that stillness is still there. They're just all passing through it. The clouds are passing through it, the rain's passing through it, the wind's passing through it. They're coming and going. None of them are around for very long. They're coming and going. But the sky in which it happens is still all the time, is vast and still. The space in this room is vast and still no matter how many people walk through it. Our mind is vast and still no matter how many thoughts go through it, no matter how many sounds come in, sensations, smells, tastes, likes, dislikes, judgments. They're just events going through it, but it has the same stillness, the same vastness. So what we do in our meditation practice is we tend to focus on the hand. So when we first start meditating, for example, and this might sound familiar to you, when you first sit down to meditate, you get your meditation instructions. Okay, observe what's happening. Yeah? You observe what's happening. You're just dominated by thinking and by sounds coming in, right? And all this stuff. And you'll find what will happen is your attention will sit on the thought and you get lost in the thought. It sits on the sound and all you can do is hear that sound and comment about the sound, and so no meditation happens. Do you know what I mean? You get totally lost in that, you get totally lost in the sensations, sleepiness comes up, get lost in that, restlessness comes up, get lost in that. At this point here, our attention isn't very accurate. Our awareness isn't concentrated, yeah? So we're not concentrating on one point. And so what happens is our attention's dispersed and we get lost in everything. But we can't see any space around anything. It's just very overwhelming. We can't see anything. Now, for those of you that have been meditating with me a bit longer, let's say with thinking, right? You're sitting there, you're meditating, watching the breath go in and out, and then suddenly your attention or your mindfulness comes up and you realise, I've been lost in a thought. Yeah, you notice that? Where before you never used to do that. It was like, Stephen's voice would bring you out of that. But now it's kind of happening yourself, isn't it? It will come up, I've been lost in a thought. As soon as you realise you're lost in the thought, what happens to the thought? It goes. The thought's gone. See, we've come to the next level. The only way that thought could go is if you noticed some space between you and the thought. You're starting to notice the space around the outside of the hand before you were lost in the hand. The thought will disappear. What's left when the thought disappears? Haven't looked. Yeah, so the thought goes, bang. Notice when I'm speaking, listen to the end of every word. Where does the sounds of my voice go to? Notice how every sound drops back into that stillness. Can you see? So when you focus at the endings of things, when you focus at the end of that sound, the stillness is always there. Yeah. And that's every sound we can hear. But the same with the thought. At this point here, you're watching the end of the thought. What's happening here is because you're practicing mindfulness, your attention is becoming more targeted, more accurate, and more precise. As it becomes more precise, the time in which you'll be lost in the thought becomes shorter. Has anyone noticed it? You start to catch it faster? Yeah, you catch it faster. And if you haven't experienced this yet, it will happen. The time you get lost in that thought gets shorter. Eventually you come to a point where you notice, right? You're lost in a thought and then straight away you're back again. So it's like a momentarily lost. It's just like boom, boom, that sort of feeling, boom, boom. Or a sound draws your attention. It goes boom, boom. Yeah, you know that one? Don't, because you remember very fast. So your accuracy is getting better and you're noticing the ending is more clear, of something ending is more clear. When that disappears, if you look, you drop back into that stillness. Yeah, you drop back into it. You might have noticed, but you drop into it. What I want you to do is pay attention to those endings and that stillness, because that is what will make the meditation practice go deeper and deeper. The space will become more and more obvious. The next stage in the development of the meditation practice is you'll notice the moment the thought comes up. You don't get lost in the thought, you notice, oh, thoughts come up, thoughts gone. Like that. You start to notice the beginning of things. The moment the sound begins, the moment the thought begins, the moment the sensation begins. And if you haven't gone this deep in the meditation practice, this might sound strange. But it's because our awareness becomes so strong through the mindfulness practice, we catch the beginnings. And then we start to see very clearly the beginning of something and the end of something. When you see this, suddenly it changes, so you have this feeling of great space around everything. Right? So you get nama rupa, you get the mind and its object, but they become separate. You get this feeling of separateness. So you get a whole lot of events happening within this space. So thoughts arise and cease within that space. Sounds come and go within that space. Sensations come and go within that space. Judgments, likes, dislikes, smells, sights within that space. But they don't affect the stillness of that space. It's at this point here that you can actually be with anything that's uncomfortable or difficult without being moved by it. Because you rest within that stillness, that space. Yeah, does that make sense? So you can train in everyday life by looking at the space around things. That's a training. You start to notice. It's very interesting. The landscape actually becomes like little puppets, little three-dimensional puppets. You've got things in front of things and they kind of slide across each other. It's really interesting. Okay. But within your meditation practice, the way you develop this, develop the accuracy of that attention, is by trying to pay attention to things ending. Yeah? So when we're watching the breath come in and out, which we will do soon, the breathing, you're watching the breath come in and out. What you do is you pay attention and try to catch the moment the breath ends. And then sit in that gap before the next breath starts. You sit within that gap and feel that gap. In the last class I did yesterday, people in the class were able to do it. They were able to sit in that gap and they were able to experience it. Not that I'm putting the challenge up here for you, but it was really good. They said once they did that, their meditation practice went a lot deeper. So what this is this is happening because what we do is we spend our time preoccupied with all the events, with all the things happening, preoccupied with the thoughts and the sounds and the smells and the tastes and the stories of our lives. But we don't realise that the very thing that we're looking for, that peace, that quiet, that stillness, is around everything else. Everything is actually just happening in that and then falling back into it again. Still lost you, Shirley?
No, I'm a bit clearer.
A bit clearer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's something to look at. So you understand what we want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Has anyone got any questions, or we'll do some meditation?
When you say concentrate on the gap, does that mean you're not breathing at that stage? So in other words, you're breathing in and you've actually stopped, and that's the gap before you breathe out?
Yes, but what I'll do is I'll clarify that. What we're doing is we're not doing the breathing. I want to clarify that. We're not doing the breathing. So it's not like yoga breathing.
Right.
No. What you're doing is observing the breath as it happens naturally, right? So the breath comes in and out by itself. Mm-hmm. Allow it to go by itself, and then see if you can catch the moment it ends and the moment the next breath begins. That will increase the accuracy of your attention and increase your concentration and your mindfulness by actually actively doing things like that, paying attention to them. So instead of paying attention to the middle of things, pay attention to the beginning and the end of things. And that will take you in the right direction. Yeah, so if you hear a sound, pay attention to the moment it ends. Things like that. Or a sensation, a pain, notice the moment it ends. Like this.
So it's not just about the breathing part.
Yeah, we're not actually doing anything at this. In the beginning we use the breathing to relax into things. Then you allow the breathing to happen naturally. And you want to just observe. You just want to observe. And again, you can use labelling to help this too if you find that useful. Okay.